In this lesson, we will consider the messages from the Lord to the first 4 of the 7 churches. As a child, I wrote to the Queen once. Sometime later, a letter arrived for me from one of her attendants. My mum kept it for ages. Such was the importance she placed upon it. Imagine getting a letter from the Lord himself. Its message should be something that we treasure and respond to in full. All 7 messages follow a similar pattern. First, the Lord addresses himself to the church, and the description of him usually ties in with the vision that John himself had had in chapter 1. A commendation then follows for anything that is praiseworthy, before a warning against what is not. Finally, an exhortation to hear the message is given, before a promise is made to the overcomer. This is so for the first 3 churches. For the last 4 churches, the order of the final 2 points is reversed, so the overcomer's promise is made before the exhortation to listen. This might be because initially the Spirit could address the whole church and encourage them to listen. However, with the passage of time, as the church was infiltrated by unbelievers who pretended a faith to gain status, company or position, then the Spirit could only address the overcomers and exhort them to hear. The first letter then is to Ephesus. Jesus introduces himself as the one who is in control of the church, walking in amongst them. They were active in service and determined in their desire to maintain the truth of the full gospel message that they had been entrusted with. By reading the letter to the Ephesians, we can get a good idea of the kind of things this entailed. They were still busy for the Lord and had not given up when things lost their initial excitement. These are all commendable attributes and challenge me as to my behaviour. Am I as keen today to serve the Lord as I was when I was first converted? If I am involved in a particular service, am I as enthusiastic in the dark winter months when few turn out as I was when the work first started? They also hated the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which Jesus also hated. It is good to hate what God hates. It is not really known who these were, although later they are associated with Balaam, who thought that he could financially profiteer from doing God's work. Perhaps there is a link to those who would seek to dominate in the church and to become rich in this life at the expense of the members of the local church. However, Jesus had a key problem with them. They had left their first love. Other things, other people perhaps, had distracted them, and so they were not red hot in their love for Christ alone. God will not accept second best for his Son, and we should closely examine ourselves and our fellowship. Do we still love the Lord more than anything, more than our history, our traditions, our comforts, our possessions? For those who truly love the Lord Jesus and show this by obedience to his commands, the promise is given of abundant life, full and eternal, in time and for eternity. About 35 miles north of Ephesus was the beautiful city of Smyrna, situated as a port on the Aegean Sea and surrounded by fertile land. It was increasingly prosperous through the export of wine and myrrh. However, its outward beauty was not matched by inward character, and it had become the centre for emperor worship, and here the persecution of the early Christians was severe. Around AD 169, Polycarp was martyred there. He was not alone in the persecution faced by the local Christians. What a comfort, then, to know that the one who addressed them was also one who had died under persecution, but was now alive again. The Christians there may have been poor materially, surrounded by increasing wealth, but the Lord knows that they are really rich. It is what lasts for eternity that has real value, rather than the size of our bank balances or our houses. The Lord knew their works and the persecution they had faced with steadfast endurance. This must have been all the harder coming from those who had claimed to be the people of God. However, their true allegiance is shown in the words that they were a synagogue of Satan. In this day of ecumenical equality, it is good to remember the Lord's own words. He that is not for me is against me. The Lord then warns them of the coming persecution, but reminds them that it is not indefinite, signified by the 10 days period. This may equate to separate periods of intense persecution under the Roman emperors, or a specific time under the then emperor. Certainly the history of the church shows that after the initial days of rapid growth, Christianity faced strong persecution from those who felt threatened by this new teaching. As we face times of difficulty, it is good to remember that our times are in His hands, and He limits the time to what He allows. Even if this persecution meant physical death for these believers, yet the promise is of a crown of life, the prospect of future reward that will enhance the glory of the Lord Jesus is something that can sustain the believer even when faced with martyrdom. For these persecuted believers, the Lord has nothing but praise. The promise to the overcomer offers certainty of future blessing. Those who are about to die for their faith were thus given the certainty that they were not dying for nothing. Their eternal future of glory with Christ was given to sustain them and us through difficult days. The third letter was to the church in Pergamos. Pergamos was a university city 55 miles north of Smyrna. The name means thoroughly married, and here we see the church completely joined with the world system. This represents the time when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, and almost overnight, thousands would have viewed themselves as nominal Christians. Increasingly, it became difficult to tell what was genuine and what was fake. However, the one who was addressing them had a sharp, two-edged sword and was well able to divide between true and false. To their credit, those in Pergamos had not renounced their faith, even when the emperor demanded their worship. This had cost some in the church their lives. However, in this church were those who not only did, but taught what Jesus hated. Balaam was paid by Balak to issue a curse against the people of Israel. See Numbers 22 to 25 and chapter 31 also. Within the church at this time were those who put financial gain above the truth. Sadly, this is not a problem that was isolated to this one location, nor to the first century alone. It is tragic to see the threat posed to this church as they would end up fighting against the Lord Jesus. This was not a fight that they could win. Those today who reject the truth of His word in favour of monetary gain and worldly influence will similarly find themselves on the wrong side of the spiritual battle. For those who remain true to the Lord, the promise is given of His sustaining strength, the manna, and the identification of those who are pure and accepted by Him, the white stone. The Lord knows them that are His. Lastly, in this lesson is the letter to Thyatira. This was a town to the southeast of Pergamos. It had known better days, when its inhabitants had worshipped a deity who wielded a double-headed axe. This god had evidently failed the population, and now, though situated on an important trade route, the city was past its heyday. Not so the one who addressed them. Eyes like fire and feet like brass, ready for the battle against idolatry and falsehood. That which the local population craved was exactly what was promised to the overcomers, power over the nations. But here, for the first time, the promise is made not to all who hear, but to the faithful within the church. The character of these final 4 churches runs concurrently to the end of the church period. It was not that they were wholly without anything that the Lord could commend. This church was increasingly active in service for God. Like then, as we look at the church today, we can see so much that is done in terms of social good. This is commendable. However, against this was the awful idolatry and sexual immorality. Jezebel, 1 Kings 16-21, was instrumental in leading Israel astray, particularly in the worship of Baal and the moral corruption that came with that. The one who searches minds and hearts knows both motive and action, and will not settle for second place in the affections of his church. Too often the church, instead of confronting immorality, has adopted the standards of the world and has lost its pure and holy character. Friendship with the world and its acceptance, or at least tolerance, has come at the price of faithfulness to his word. The picture of her children being killed points to the decreasing future the church faces, rather than, as some hope, the church continuing gloriously until it is universally dominant. These messages are as relevant today as they were in the first century. The Lord looks to commend what is good, but he will not overlook that which dishonours his name. The question for us is, where do we fit in, both individually and in my local church?